everybody. Welcome to this week's edition of Daily Kos The Brief. This is our weekly show about politics. I'm Marcos Molitzis. Normally, I'd be here with Carrie Alavel, but we've been off the air for almost a month, I guess, a little bit over a month. And this was going to be our triumphant return, and she was sick. So instead, we have Joan McCarter, which is perfect, actually. Hi, Joan.
Hi.
Joan is perfect because she just wasted's not the right word, right? But she just spent 3 weeks of her life covering every step of the drama in the U.S. House of Representatives with Kevin McCarthy's ouster through votes and votes and votes, failed votes, as Republicans went through like after caucus to finally land on who might be perhaps the worst person possible for the job. What's his name? Mike Johnson?
Second to worst. They could have George Santos.
Oh, yeah, George Santos. Okay, I got it. Second to worst. So, Joan, thank you so much for joining me and in doing so very last minute as well. So really appreciate it.
I'm glad to be here.
So, since we've been gone for a while, we never did get a chance to talk about Kevin McCarthy and his ouster. And at this point, I guess it's a bit of old news, so I don't really want to rehash it too much.
Oh, but it's so delicious.
But looking back at it, given everything that's passed, do you read it differently now than you did in the moment as it was happening? Because as it was happening, it seemed to be a temper tantrum by Matt Gaetz and a handful of his nihilist Freedom Caucus people. Mm-hmm. And Democrats saying, like, we're going to vote against them no matter what, so you guys get your act together. And McCarthy didn't seem to know what he was doing, didn't know how to count votes, apparently, something that is endemic to the whole Republican caucus. They don't know how to count votes. And looking back at it now, do you see things differently, or is that pretty much what happened?
I think I see more agency in Matt Gaetz, Nancy Mace, the eight who were being led in large part by Steve Bannon. I see more method to the madness in terms of just sowing more chaos, creating more upheaval, giving Vladimir Putin another gift of American government in disarray. So I do think that there was it wasn't just a temper tantrum, I don't think, by Gaetz. That was part of it. I mean, he really, really dislikes Kevin McCarthy. But would he have gone to this degree to oppose him? I'm not sure without a lot of egging on in the background by Steve Bannon. So there's that element of it. I think that might have been why it happened now instead of in another few months. Maybe not, maybe it was always coming, but it was a pretty extreme measure. It has never happened before in the history of the United States. So it's a big deal.
So that's interesting. If it was Steve Bannon's master plan, that master plan clearly included Matt Gaetz being the speaker, right? That was their end.
I think it's still having Matt Gaetz there as the chaos agent, able to stir things up. I think that you saw that in one of the failed votes. First, Matt Gaetz was supporting Tom Emmer, who was nominee number 3 for the speakership. Gaetz originally came out saying, yeah, Emmer, I'm behind Emmer, only to have the rug pulled out from Emmer once he'd gotten the nod from the rest of the conference, with Trump coming in and then Gaetz coming in and saying, oh yeah, we can't do this. And that, I think, probably has Steve Bannon's fingerprints on it too. So I don't know that this was the end game of the master plan. I don't know that he has a master plan beyond just making things as disruptive and as chaotic and as dysfunctional as possible. And, Matt Gaetz is the perfect guy to help him do that.
No, that's true. And just for context, Steve Bannon literally talks about being a chaos agent. And that's why he got behind Donald Trump in 2016. That has been his operating theory, that you just break things. And I'm not sure what happens after you break those things, but his whole goal in politics is just to be exactly that, just to create chaos. Donald Trump's a perfect example of it. And the ouster of McCarthy really kind of validated that theory, right? Because we had 3 weeks of chaos.
Yep.
And we started with Steve Scalise was the first Republican to win the caucus vote for the nominee. And normally that would mean that the whole caucus gets behind that person, right? That's
Right.
how
Particularly
normal
since,
parties work.
he's majority leader. He's a known entity. Most of them like the guy, except for McCarthy. McCarthy really didn't like him. And I think that was one of the things that happened to him, that McCarthy was backstabbing on behalf of Jim Jordan, the
They're
next
such lovely
nominee.
people, aren't they?
Oh, they're horrible people. They are horrible people. I mean, Steve Scalise probably would have been the least worst, even though he is, what is he?
And he's reliably conservative, right? There's literally,
Reliably
on a
conservative.
policy standpoint, there's really nothing anybody could point to and say that guy's not a good
No,
conservative.
no. He's the guy who called himself David Duke without the baggage back when he was running for stuff in
Literally.
Louisiana. So, he's not a lefty by any means. Scalise would not have been the worst, because Scalise at least knows how stuff is supposed to work, because he's been majority leader. He's been in the leadership for all of this time. So that was Scalise.
And I just want to really, their worst possible option of this bunch was the guy who literally called himself David Duke without the baggage, just to establish where we are on the spectrum, which is so far to the right that I can't even fathom it. So so Scalise crashes and burns. He came close though, right? I mean, was it the original 8 or 10 that really refused to back him, if I recall correctly?
Yeah, Jordan sort of gave a for him. Actually said in a meeting, and this created a great deal of confrontation and animus in the caucus. He actually told Jordan in a meeting, or Scalise in a meeting, that he had one chance, he had one vote to get to be speaker. Jordan would introduce him, but if he lost that first vote, then he would immediately have to drop out and endorse Jordan. And a bunch of members overheard that and freaked out, and started the firing squad again.
People. We've established
they're lovely people. They are lovely people. And that's one of the reasons why the next candidate, Jordan, blew up. He just made too many of them too angry over that move with Scalise.
He never came close. I mean, it was 20 to 30, or around the 20s, right? Low 20s in opposition.
It got to the point where it was like in the 80s of people saying, absolutely not, I will not vote for this man to be my leader.
Yeah, and it took him a while to really realize that. Like, he pushed longer than most.
Really hard. And I think probably that didn't help either. I mean, there was the bullying of members. There were the death threats. There were people sending texts to members' wives and kids. There was really, really ugly stuff happening from the forces that Jordan instigates. It was bad. It was really bad. And I think that hurt him. So did the fact probably that he threatened to hold them in for the weekend, taking vote after vote after vote after vote. Don't get in the way of a congressperson in their weekend. Ever.
I mean, that's the best time to pass an omnibus that funds the government for the next year. It's just threatening to do it on a Friday, right?
Right. No, and that's why they all happen on Fridays, or the weekend before Thanksgiving, the weekend before Christmas. Yeah.
Yep. All right. So Jordan finally surrenders. Okay, so who's next?
Tom Emmer. Who probably wouldn't have been a horrible one either. He's, except for the counting thing, he's the whip.
None of those know how to count.
Well, he also gets lied to a lot. I mean, Republicans are liars. They could very well tell him, yeah, sure, I'm there for you, and then not be. So I don't know that you could put that entirely on Emmer.
I just want to take a quick aside to note that Nancy Pelosi had the same margin of majority in the last Congress, and she passed all manners of historic legislation. And she always knew what votes she had, and she was smart enough throughout her entire career, not just the last Congress, to know when to let Congress people vote differently if they needed to because of their district. And she actually she knew how to manage, how to account for people's individual interests. Something none of these guys know how to do.
No,
They can't even do a
no.
basic count. It's absolutely amazing. Lying or not, at least nobody lied to Nancy Pelosi because she gave them no reason
Right, right.
to lie.
It wasn't going to go to the floor if she didn't have the votes.
Yeah.
That was just that. I mean, they couldn't get a defense appropriations bill passed.
Yeah. So the Republican
Republicans
National,
refusing
yeah,
to pass defense appropriations, and they put it on the floor 3 times.
so bad. All right. So Emmer, why did he just couldn't get the votes, right? He just couldn't
He
get the
couldn't get the
balance.
votes. He couldn't
Yeah.
get the votes. It started out looking good, like I said earlier, with Gates saying, "Yeah, sure, I'll help Emmer. I like him. He's a good guy," and then immediately turning around and stabbing him in the back once he got the nod from the conference, and then it just melted away. Support just melted away.
And so was Johnson the next guy?
Johnson was the last.
All right. So I will, for full disclosure, the night that they had the caucus meeting that nominated Johnson, within the Republican caucus, Joan was working late because she, I think, worked late every day those 3 weeks. She's working late, and I said on our company Slack, I was like, where do these people think they're going to keep getting these votes? Like, isn't this the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different outcome? And so we were convinced that this was Johnson, and quite quickly we saw information coming out that showed what a disaster of a human being he was.
Mhm.
Like, yeah, no, the moderates aren't going to go for this guy. Like, this thing's going to continue. And then we wake up and he's got the votes, all of them,
Yep.
every single one.
I have to admit, I had sort of a bad feeling when I went to bed that night, thinking, they're probably just so worn down with all of this that they'll just go ahead and do it. Frankly, I thought that's what was going to happen with Jordan, that they'd be so freaked out about the chaos that they would just say, fine, great,
That's
you
what
can
Jordan
have it.
wanted.
The
Yeah.
problem with Jordan, of course, was that he was just so aggressive toward them and so bullying and so
He's such
awful.
an asshole. Yeah.
Yeah, they just couldn't. So we end up with this nice guy who nobody knows anything about. Lots of the new members, I'm convinced, don't have any idea who he is. And yeah, sure, he's Jim Jordan in a suit jacket, but he's nice enough. Yeah, sure, this guy. We've got to do something. We've got to land on somebody. So yeah, okay, him.
Yeah, I remember Ken Buck was saying he's a Colorado conservative who seems to, at least he acts like he cares about election
Mhm.
integrity, right? So one of his big
Yep.
issues was election denialism, the big lie, and creating this fiction that Biden had not won. And he sort of had made that a litmus test.
Yes.
And suddenly you have Mike Johnson, who literally filed the legal briefs challenging the certification of Joe Biden's
Mhm.
victories in
Yep.
certain key states. So he was a
Yep.
clear participant, an active participant in
Yeah,
the
he was
insurrection.
almost the architect of how Congress approached this, how the House Republicans and Senate Republicans said, okay, these are the states that we will deny certification of the electors for. That was him creating this. And somehow that was okay for Ken Buck.
It was weird. I mean, I know his reasoning was something like, well, the courts are okay. If you're using the courts, that's the right way to
Right.
challenge
Taking it to the court was the right way to do it, which, okay,
because
yes.
it wasn't
But then when the court says no in the Congress, you say, okay,
yeah, I mean,
fine, we give up.
yeah, exactly. So it was actually bizarre to see these moderates, and we have a situation politically where 18 of those Republicans represent Joe Biden districts, and those districts are typically in an off-year election. There'll be more, lower turnout. You have weird
Mhm.
dynamics, and in this case, Republicans won, and they're disproportionately represented in California, in New York, but other places as well. And they have they first of all, most of them voted for Jim Jordan multiple times.
Mhm.
Um, Jim Jordan's got national name recognition. He's somebody that already Democrats were going to sort of wrap around their necks. And now you have Mike Johnson, who every day, Joan, it's like it gets worse. He is
The stories coming in.
like this backbencher who nobody had heard of, who was, he was conspiring with Donald Trump and doing his shenanigans, but he had no public profile. Nobody bothered to do a quick Google search on him apparently, and they all sort of fell in line. And you got 18 people that now have to run with Mike Johnson wrapped around their necks, or anchor, whatever the metaphor you want to use. And it just blows my mind that none of them had any sense of self-preservation to
Yeah.
either say like, not this guy, or to cut a deal with the Democrats to get one of those guys as speaker, which
Yeah.
seemed to be the logical outcome. And maybe, I know Johnson made this argument, like, if you don't vote for me, we got to cut a deal with the Democrats. And apparently that was the worst thing possible.
Yeah.
And do you have a sense why they were so opposed to having one of their moderates be speaker and cutting that deal with the Democrats?
Those Biden 18, I have no idea. Peer pressure, fear for their safety, their personal safety, their family safety, maybe. Certainly they don't have fear for their political future, because that was just signing their political death warrants. I mean,
they're gone.
A national abortion ban might be the mildest thing that Mike Johnson supports.
Seriously, tell us some of the other things he's said and done.
He is just so rapidly anti-woman, anti-LGBTQ+, anti-brown people, anti-black people, anti-anything you can be against that isn't white, male, Christian.
He has said that societal ills like gun violence are because of no-fault divorce.
Yep.
Birth control.
Yep.
The sexual revolution, feminism. I mean, these are.
Yep.
This is just one of the things. He thinks that he believes in a religious litmus test to run for office.
Mm-hmm.
What else? I should.
I know we should have all of these things memorized. It's just that there's so many and they keep coming out. More and more stuff.
Yeah, which one did I just see come in right now? Literally just came in right now. Was he compared environmentalists pushing for climate action to the devil.
Oh, yes.
The devil. I mean, it's not even saying like I disagree because of economic, impact to our economy and people losing their job. Like, there's an argument to be made. It's a bad argument, but he's not in this realm of existence.
Because all of his policy beliefs, he has said, I get all of my policy beliefs from the Bible.
Yeah, all of them.
And he means it. He means it.
That's the part, right? There's a part where you can say things to get elected. You can say things to have a public persona,
mm-hmm.
or to be. I think a lot of these Republicans, like Matt Gaetz and Nancy Mace, I think they think they're Instagram influencers, not legislators.
Yeah.
He's a true believer. Johnson really believes that environmentalists fighting for, against climate change are the devil. I mean, it is almost hourly that something new comes out, and he's been speaker now for what, a week, maybe? I've lost track of time. It's like time-space continuum.
It was last Wednesday.
It blows my mind that things are still emerging out of it, and then you get situations like there's going to be a vote in the House on Wednesday. We're recording this on Tuesday. On Wednesday, that would cut funding for the California rail. It seems very sort of esoteric and very local. It's going to fail. Mm-hmm. Senate would never go for it, so it's going nowhere. But you know what it does is some of those Biden district Republicans are actually clustered. There's 4 of them clustered in Orange County, Southern California, which is served by this rail line. He's going to force them to vote against a program that is likely popular in their districts, and so there's none of that self-preservation of the majority that a Nancy Pelosi would have. Nancy Pelosi would never have that vote to begin with, and if she were to have that vote, she would orchestrate it so those people would vote against her So then they can go back home and talk about how independent from Nancy Pelosi they are.
Right.
I think Johnson thinks he's going to pray his way back into the majority.
I think
Jesus got
so.
him there.
Yeah. Yeah. And part of it is his naivete. Part of it is his total lack of experience running anything in Congress.
Anything. No bills, no legislation to.
He's only been there since 2017 and has never had a leadership role beyond, Republican study conference or something. He's had sort of messaging stuff, but he's never had to do anything logistically at all, ever. So this is part of what's crazy too. He came out with this insane agenda where he was still going to try to push what McCarthy was trying to do, pass 8 appropriations bills in 3 weeks' time to take to the Senate and say, here, you pass all of these or the government shut this down. Well,
and when is the government shutting down?
November 17th.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's in the bill that's coming up tomorrow is one of the appropriations bills. It's the transportation appropriation bill. They're going to try to do it, legislative affairs, housing, and there's one other that they're going to try to do just this week, and they're not coming in until tomorrow.
And then they're going to leave Friday.
And they're going to leave Friday. Yeah.
So basically,
and they also have the Israeli aid bill in which they're trying to cut IRS funding. They've got all of the, reprimands and censures and expulsions of members that are privileged and have to come to the floor. So he's putting out stuff that is unrealistic. And I think that his inexperience is one of the things that's really got me worried about how government's going to be functioning after November 17th, if it is.
Yeah, it's been amazing seeing Senate Republicans kind of, you got the nihilist crew over there. They exist, the Ron Johnsons and the Tommy Tubervilles, but the mainstream Republicans in the Senate are just so frustrated.
Yeah.
They're not even hiding their disdain.
Yeah. Well, even the Johnsons and the Tubervilles were thinking, the House really is a little crazy. They kind of got to get their stuff in gear here. But then, they're all aboard the Mike Johnson train.
Yeah, and then you mentioned the Israel aid, and that's actually a kind of fascinating one. I actually think this is one place where they actually are being very clever, because what they're doing is they're demanding a offset to pay for the. First of all, they split off Israel from Ukrainian aid, which the Senate still isn't aboard, including Senate Republicans.
Right.
Are not aboard.
And Mitch McConnell, most importantly.
Yeah. And but in the House, so they're splitting them, and then they're saying that they have to be offset. And it's clever because the Israel aid is, I forget the exact number, it's what, $7 billion, something like that?
14.6.
Oh, 14. Okay. The Ukraine aid bill it's I don't know, 80 billion.
80 some, yeah.
Yeah. So if they set the precedent that the Israeli aid needs to be offset, then why wouldn't Ukrainian aid be offset? And there's no $80 billion in offset to be found. So it's a very sort of clever way to try to kill Ukrainian aid and do Putin's bid in the House. But even I think he did screw up on the Israel stuff, because cutting sort of evidence that they live in his bubble, because they went after IRS funding, when the IRS funding actually brings in more money than it takes up, because obviously these agents are going after tax cheats, and most of these are millionaires and billionaires. These are Republicans, and so it's chafed Republicans that spending is there, right? Because their own donors hate it. They're being targeted, and so instead of going after, I don't know, something that might have been politically more palatable to broader public, I don't know what that might be. They went after something that just math doesn't even work out, and they're getting a lot of pushback on that, which has been kind of interesting.
Well, it's just a gimme for Democrats to say, they're putting their tax cheat billionaires above Israel. This is what they're doing. They're playing politics with Israel to give their tax cheats a break. That's just a big old fat softball for Democrats to hit out of the market. It was not the smartest political move, although it will make the rabid crowd wild. They'll love it. Except for Marjorie Taylor Greene and Tom Massey. They don't like it. but they don't want any spending. So
They're all nihilists.
yeah,
They're all horrible people, and they're all fighting each other. It's been fascinating. So there's sort of kind of layers here. One, there's the kind of the inexperience slash stupidity of some of the tactics he's doing right now, because he really doesn't know what he's doing. There's a real world consequences if the government shuts down, if they don't get their shit together. And I don't see how they do that. I mean, we may
yeah.
have to see a continuing resolution just to keep the government funded at current levels, and it might not be coming out of Johnson's office, right? That could be a discharge petition.
Well, Johnson said he has been willing to do a continuing resolution either till, I think he said January 15th or April 15th.
Okay.
April is not going to fly with the Senate. That's too long. They're not going to let that go. And if it goes past January, that's when the 1% cuts that Biden agreed to way back when in the debt ceiling deal for the budget, if they didn't have all of the appropriations done by the end of this year, that agreement said they would start cutting everything by 1%. Everything. Defense, veterans.
I mean, would that make
border security, everything
Matt
would.
Gaetz and Marjorie Taylor Greene happy?
Yes, it would. So that's probably why one of the options that he's got for a continuing resolution would go into April. So he did put that out there as a possibility. But that's going to have to be to get past his crazies, all of the people that booted McCarthy. He's going to have to put really, really deep cuts into his continuing resolution, cuts that the Senate is not going to accept. So, nothing has been saved at all. It's only been worsened in the 3 weeks since we haven't had McCarthy. The rest of the nightmare still exists, only it's just a little bit worse because we've got a total newbie in charge of it.
And if he does anything to anger the nihilists, they can still pull that trigger again, right? There's nothing stopping them from pulling a McCarthy?
Nope.
And Democrats would be happy to vote no.
Right. I mean, there's also nothing stopping Democrats from pulling it too.
Oh. that would be interesting. And so the last layer then is how this impacts the next year's elections. And this is I've always been very bullish on the House Democrats' chances, just based on special election performance, where Democrats are significantly overperforming Joe Biden's numbers, and there is clear correlation between special elections and general elections that follow them. And also the fact that there's 18 juicy, plump Biden districts is right for their taking. And their majority is, you only need to take, 5, 6 of them? Might have to do the math.
Yeah.
How many?
5.
Yeah, 5.
Wait. 6.
6, yeah. 6
it's because there are 2 vacancies now. The math is confused in my head
it's very, very doable. On top of everything, Republicans now have a speaker who's never raised money. So this is literally one of the jobs of a party leader. Everybody thinks it's just to legislate. No, they're spending 80% of their time is raising money for everybody else. And this is where none of those, except maybe Scalise, but none of those candidates had really done any effort to build loyalty with the caucus by raising money. This is what Nancy Pelosi did relentlessly. Jeffries.
Well, and McCarthy, that's, one of the things that got McCarthy the top job was that he brought in a ton of money.
Yeah, it was almost $80 million in the last 2 years. I think that's what he had brought in for his caucus. This guy is not raising any money.
No. And I think he's so extreme that a lot of, I don't know. I shouldn't say a lot of donors won't jump in because, I can totally see, for instance, Leonard Leo, who has the same sort of worldview, thinking, well, okay, I can find a few spare million to
But if you're a corporate PAC, you're
going to be very careful.
He's a nice, safe, pro-business, anti-tax, anti-regulation. Okay, that's safe money. Johnson, first of all, we don't even know where he stands on a lot of this stuff. And he's just a wacko, right? Nobody wants to be associated with that unless you're a true believer. And they've got that audience tapped out. I don't think there's much there for them to continue as far as money and energy. That's been their base forever. There's not much there.
And they're going to be wanting to send their money to Donald Trump.
Yeah. Yeah. And Donald Trump doesn't share. It's somebody else who doesn't raise money for anybody else. So it's going to be a fascinating situation to watch, both just for the state of the country and our budget and having a functioning government, but also it has huge ramifications for the 2024 elections. And so it's I'm sort of like torn between like, oh crap, he's going to break the government, and like, oh great, he's going to make it so much easier to win back the House and even to hold the Senate, like
to defend the Senate. Yeah. Yeah, I wanted to hear you talk about that a little bit.
I guess I'll have to wait till next week to talk about that because we are out of time. So thank you, Joan, so much for joining us. Really appreciate it, especially last minute. But it is also sort of perfect because this is been so consuming just politically in the political world. And also your expertise in it is unparalleled. So such a pleasure to have you here to talk about it. Thank you so much.
Thanks. I was very glad to do it.
And thanks to everybody who's watching the show, who reads Daily Kos, who takes actions, who does work for democracy. Thanks to Walter, who produces the show. Thanks to you, the viewer, reader, activist, for doing what you do and being a fellow traveler in this battle for our nation. It's going to be quite a year. We're starting to see. It didn't look this dramatic even, a few months ago. But, with Mike Johnson at the helm, with somebody who thinks that environmentalists are Satan, that's who the Republicans have landed on to lead their House. And you got Donald Trump leading the top of their ticket. It's going to be a weird one, guys. So I'm glad to have you guys fighting with us, for our country. And I look forward glad to be back in the air. Look forward to having this conversation and working for our democracy in the coming year. Thanks so much. Talk to you guys next week. Bye-bye.